All right, you asked for it, you got it. Another brief word from me, your instructor. Okay, so now we're talking about the 1920s, and I would be remiss if I covered the 1920s without mentioning one of the biggest religious movements in the history of our country, which is the birth of fundamentalism. So, fundamentalism, another term that gets thrown out a lot without a lot of context or information behind it. Um, so what is fundamentalism? A good way to think about it is to think about the Titanic, right? The Titanic was this big, beautiful ship. It's the sort of the climax of human achievement. Nothing like it had ever been created before. Um, and then it sinks, and there's rowboats, trying to get away from it. Um, if you think about that compare that to American society. So in the 1920s, most Americans are thinking we're at the pinnacle of human existence right now. We've created something that will never be destroyed. No human has ever seen anything like this before. And then the fundamentalists are the ones in the rowboats rowing away as fast as they can. Right? Um, so Protestant evangelicals, which are a good portion of Americans, were the Titanic at the dock, enjoying all the wonderful new accomplishments. But fundamentalists were the people in the rowboat. The Titanic had already hit the iceberg, and they were just trying to get safety. Um, so, at its core, fundamentalism was a reaction to the trends in social structures. The host religion, which would be Protestantism in this case, um, also educational and the intellectual climate and the politics. Um, Fundamentalism takes scripture and gives it a literal reading. It's very uncompromising, and traditionally, it won't work with um, any other group that doesn't share their belief. So they're very uncompromising. Um, Fundamentalists also believe in a concept called dispensationalism, which is end of the world type stuff, and that the history of the world is a code that has to be interpreted, and makes it so. So what this does is it makes them, the believers, into a sort of that gives them a part in a sacred history. God is the engine of this history, and He's the one that makes it go. So it's different from evangelicalism uh, and revivalism and other Christian movements, because evangelicalism, they're more open to working with other people, more apt to compromise, and they want people to join their cause. Fundamentalism was more militant, more aggressive, and more standoffish. So, what are the origins of American Christian fundamentalism? Oh, by the way, this definition of fundamentalism that I just told you also applies to other religious groups like Judaism, Islam, and other religious traditions. So, American Christian fundamentalism, begins for the most part at the end of the 19th century. At this time, most Americans believed that Christianity was the only basis for a healthy civilization, and the superiority of Western civilization was a result of Protestantism. And for this reason, um, or this was because it promoted two things. Number one was capitalism, which was considered to be in harmony with the Bible because it encouraged the poor to be self sufficient. Number two was education, and not necessarily academic education, but moral education. So, again, Protestant Christians believe that Western civilization owes everything to Protestantism because it teaches capitalism and moral education. Okay, so then at the end of the 19th century, we know that the country becomes more urbanized, which causes all kinds of chaos and lack of order. Uh, Urbanization also represents a modernization of America, which meant more people clamoring for more rights. Progressivism. So fundamentalism was caused or started by those who were uncomfortable by the circumstances of the 20th century. Like I said, it's a reaction to what was happening. They were responding to the social, intellectual, and religious crises of their time, including unbelief, which was becoming a legitimate form of living back then. Unbelief had been, unheard of 30, 40 years before this. So, what were the issues that caused the reaction? World War I raises the question of survival of civilization and morality. World War I is so devastating, it makes people start to question, can Christianity really save us? Or is it science? Or is it both? Many say, yes, Christianity is the only thing that can save us. We need to double down. The fundamentalists. They're the ones who said that. Then you have 1920s culture, which they believed was turning away from God. You have an increase of pluralism, which means different modes of belief, both political and social. Socialism becomes more acceptable. Prohibition starts losing support in the 1920s, which sends fundamentalists into a bit of a panic. There was just too much change. Too many things are happening, and there's this group of Christians who don't know how to handle it, and they become the fundamentalists. They're like strangers in their own land, right? It's like they woke up one morning in their own house and everything had changed. So, who do they blame? What do they blame? Modernism, which signified a change in American society and signified a change in what was acceptable. More people are vying for authority, for say, in how the country should be run and how society should function. And there's more people, more diverse groups of people living together in new environments, especially as cities are growing and you start to get new belief systems. And those who had been at the top for so long see themselves from going from having unquestioned and unchallenged authority to becoming what they consider to be a beleaguered minority. So the Scopes monkey trial is a perfect example of this, and you'll learn more about that in the next few slides. So that's American fundamentalism, huge deal in the early 20th century, in the 20s, and it becomes a big deal again with the religious right in the 1970s and early 1980s. So enjoy the rest of the lesson.